The night the silence broke. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because once you step inside the story, you're not walking out untouched. This is the kind of investigation that buries itself in your mind, the kind that keeps you thinking long after the screen goes dark. The night everything began was unusually quiet in Zapopan, a quiet that felt staged, almost rehearsed. Just after 2 a.m., the city's usual nighttime rhythm froze. Street vendors had packed up early, and the taxis disappeared from the corners where they normally lingered. No one knew it yet, but the silence wasn't an accident. It was a warning. A convoy of unmarked vehicles moved through the dimly lit streets, each one led by federal officers wearing plain clothes. Their radios were muted, their faces unreadable. They weren't sure what they were walking into, only that their target was a man whispered about in criminal circles for more than a decade. A man known as L85. His real name was Eric Valencia, one of the founding architects behind a cartel that had grown from a small local operation into one of Mexico's most notorious criminal organizations. For years, authorities tried to get close to him, but every time, he slipped through. Informants went silent. Leads evaporated. And more than once, high-level investigations stalled for reasons no one could fully explain. But tonight was different. Authorities had received information, credible, urgent, and impossible to ignore. A source inside the criminal network had come forward, claiming that L85 was preparing to flee the country. The reason? A rumored internal conflict with another high-ranking figure, someone who wanted him out of the picture. By dawn, if he escaped, he would vanish forever. The officers reached a gated compound on the outskirts of the city. It looked ordinary from the outside. Neat hedges, a metal door, no alarms blaring. But inside, it was rumored to be a safe house used by people with far too much to hide. As soon as they cut the power and breached the gate, they realized the danger wasn't outside the walls. It was waiting for them inside. The compound was empty. Too empty. Furniture covered in sheets. No food. No personal belongings. No signs of anyone living there at all. Yet everything felt recently used. A faint smell of coffee, a curtain still swaying, a lamp warm to the touch, as if someone had switched it off minutes earlier. One officer noticed something strange. A single cell phone on the table, screen cracked, battery removed. Another found tire marks in the garage, fresh enough that the rubber still smelled burnt. Whoever was here had left fast. But there was one more thing, something small, something easily overlooked. A passport photo, ripped in half, lying near the back exit. The face on the photo was unmistakable. Even torn, even faded, there was no question. It was him. L85. The officers exchanged looks. He had been here. Minutes ago. Maybe seconds. Without wasting time, they swept the grounds, then moved into the basement. The door leading down was locked, not just locked, but reinforced with steel bars that didn't match the rest of the house. The lock was warm, as if someone had tried to open it recently, but failed. "Get the tools," one of the officers said. It took nearly a full minute to break through the door, and as the hinges finally gave way, the basement unfolded into darkness. It wasn't a storage room. It wasn't a bunker. It looked more like an improvised office. Maps on the wall, red markers scattered across a table, stacks of printed documents that had been hastily burned but not fully destroyed. The air was thick with the smell of smoke. Someone had tried to erase everything. One officer sifted through the charred papers. Most were too damaged to read, but a few fragments remained intact. Names. Dates. Locations stretching from Guadalajara to Tijuana. Financial notes. And at the center of the table, the one page not burned at all, was a printed international arrest warrant stamped by U.S. federal authorities. L85 knew he was being hunted not just by Mexico, but across borders. The officers thought this was the big discovery, that their suspect was running, that he might already be out of reach. But then one of them found something that made the room go silent. In the far corner, a metal locker was slightly ajar. Inside, neatly stacked and untouched, were 7 hard drives, each labeled with a date. But one label stood out. It wasn't a date. It was a name that should not have been there. A name belonging to a high-ranking official, someone publicly committed to fighting organized crime. Someone who, according to this evidence, might have been working with the very people they were sworn to stop. The officer, holding the drive, felt his stomach tighten. Because if what they found was real, the investigation was far from simple. This wasn't just about capturing one man. It was about exposing a network that reached far deeper than anyone imagined. And then came the moment that sealed the tension of the night. From upstairs, a phone began to ring. Not a cell phone, a landline. No one had touched anything. No one had triggered anything. It was ringing on its own. Slow. Echoing. As if someone on the other end expected an answer. The lead officer hesitated, then walked toward the sound. When he picked up the receiver, a voice whispered through the static, calm, composed, and disturbingly familiar. "You're too late. He's already gone." Then the line went dead. The line that should not exist. For a long moment, the officers stood frozen, the dial tone humming like a warning from somewhere they couldn't see. The call wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. No one was supposed to know they were there. No one was supposed to know what they had found. And certainly no one outside the compound should have had access to that landline. But someone did. Someone confident enough to call. Someone aware enough to know the exact moment to strike fear in a room full of trained investigators. The lead officer, Commander Ruiz, hung up the phone with a tight jaw. He'd spent 23 years digging into criminal networks, and he knew one thing instantly. They weren't dealing with a simple chase anymore. This was surveillance. Embedded surveillance. Whoever had made that call was close. Close enough to watch them from the shadows, close enough to know when to speak, close enough to understand what they were about to uncover. He ordered the team to secure the hard drives and the half-burned documents. They worked quietly, each officer hyper-aware of every sound. The ticking pipe in the wall, the distant hum of traffic, the faint thump of footsteps echoing through the compound as backup units arrived. Yet beneath it all was a single unspoken truth. The investigation had just expanded far beyond L85. Whatever they found in that basement connected him to people no one expected. People with power, influence, positions that should have been untouchable. An hour later, the compound was crawling with investigators. Forensics combed through every corner, tech units boxed the drives, and intelligence officers began piecing together what remained of the burned files. There was no trace of the mysterious caller. No fingerprints on the phone. No recent calls in the system. No visible tampering. Whoever made that call knew how to disappear. But the real trouble started when the team returned to the Central Command Office in Mexico City. A deputy director, a man known for rigid protocol and a spotless record, stormed into the room demanding possession of the hard drives. He claimed higher authorization. He claimed urgency. He claimed jurisdiction. But something was wrong. His eyes wouldn't settle. His breathing was tight. And the badge he flashed had an expiration date that didn't match any known protocol. Commander Ruiz stepped forward. "With respect, sir, these drives are under restricted chain of custody. We'll need direct verification from the Attorney General before transferring." The deputy director cut him off. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Commander. Hand them over." Ruiz held his ground. "Sir, with respect, I said hand them over." The room fell silent. And that's when the realization hit Ruiz like a slow-rising flame. The name on the drive. The unburned page left behind in the basement. The landline call. None of it was an accident. Someone inside the system was trying to control the evidence, trying to steer the investigation into a dead end before anyone could connect the dots. Ruiz calmly placed the hard drives on the table. "Of course, sir," he said. The deputy director snatched the evidence box, turned sharply, and walked straight into the arms of internal affairs officers who had been waiting behind the door. One of them held up a warrant. "Deputy Director Mendoza, you are under investigation for obstruction of justice and unauthorized interference in an active federal case." The man's face drained of color. Ruiz didn't smile, but his eyes hardened with something close to relief. Mendoza wasn't their biggest problem, but he was proof of something worse. The rot was real, and it was deeper than they feared. Hours later, With the compromised official removed, the team finally decrypted the first of the hard drives. What they found wasn't just concerning, it was destabilizing. The files contained intelligence reports, shipment logs, and internal memos dated over the last 11 years. Some were marked confidential. Others carried signatures of individuals serving at high levels in security agencies. There were communications between cartel figures and anonymous intermediaries. Strategic movements. Locations of planned operations. It was a roadmap, not for law enforcement, but for the people law enforcement was trying to stop. Someone had been feeding information into the criminal network like in 4-drip, keeping them alive, alert, and always one step ahead. Ruiz rubbed his eyes, fighting off exhaustion. It wasn't just corruption. It was coordination. And L-85 was part of a system much bigger than the man they had chased that night. But one file stood out among the rest, a document titled Protocol Sierra. Transfer Contingency, Priority Target. Inside was a list of names. Most were aliases. A few were real, but the last one stopped everyone cold. It belonged to a senior security official stationed in the United States, someone deeply involved in binational intelligence operations. Someone who had been publicly advocating for aggressive action against criminal groups for years. Someone who, if connected to this, could set off a political landslide. The room tensed as Ruiz scrolled to the bottom of the file. There, in a small block of text, was a scheduled date. A date for the transfer of sensitive information. A date that was only 48 hours away. Whatever was coming, they were running out of time to stop it. And just when they began debating their next move, an officer burst into the room, his voice tight with urgency. "Commander, we just intercepted a communication. It's confirmed." "Confirmed what?" Ruiz asked. L-85 was flown out of the safe house area hours before we arrived. And he wasn't fleeing on his own. "Then who moved him?" Ruiz asked. The officer swallowed. It was an extraction, and it came from inside our own system. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was realization. Someone wasn't just protecting L-85. Someone was using him. And the true operation hadn't even begun. The man behind the curtain. The command center buzzed with tension, not the loud, frantic kind, but the quiet, heavy tension that settles when everyone in the room understands they're one step away from a truth no one wants to face. Commander Ruiz stood over the digital board, staring at the intercepted communication logs. Every line was a reminder that the investigation had crossed into dangerous territory. L-85 hadn't escaped. He had been escorted out, extracted, protected by someone with access to high-level systems, transport routes, and diplomatic channels. Someone with enough authority to disguise a covert extraction as a routine security transfer. The discovery felt less like uncovering a crime and more like peeling back the edge of a curtain that revealed an entire operation beneath it. The question wasn't where L-85 had gone. The question was why someone wanted him removed so urgently. A tech analyst pulled up the transfer logs. "Commander, the aircraft that moved him didn't use cartel resources. It was registered under an international task force. One that doesn't typically handle detainee movement." Ruiz frowned. "Which task force?" The analyst hesitated, then clicked open the registry. A seal appeared on the screen, instantly recognizable. "Commander, it was a joint task force operating out of the United States." The room shifted into stunned silence. Not because they believed the U.S. was involved in wrongdoing, but because this meant one thing. Someone inside a collaborative security network was manipulating international resources. Someone who knew how to hide in plain sight, using legitimate structures to conduct illegitimate moves. Ruiz took a long breath. "We need confirmation before we jump to conclusions. Trace the clearance level required to authorize that flight." The analyst typed quickly. Lines of code scrolled upward. Access logs. Clearance keys. Authentication signatures. It took only a moment for the computer to isolate a match. A single name flashed across the screen. A high-ranking liaison officer. A man praised often in public for strengthening international efforts against criminal organizations. A man who appeared at conferences, spoke passionately on public safety, and had built a reputation as a relentless fighter of organized crime. Ruiz stared at the name. That can't be right. But the evidence was there, the signature, the approval time, the matching authorization key. The liaison officer had ordered the flight, and the flight had carried L-85. Still, the team needed absolute confirmation. They contacted the U.S. Task Force headquarters, expecting denial, confusion, maybe even assistance in clarifying a misunderstanding. Instead, what came back was a simple, pointed message. Inquiry received. Stand by. Minutes passed. Long, heavy minutes. Then another message arrived, this time from a secure line. Commander Ruiz, we have been investigating the same officer. We believe he has been facilitating information leaks for years. You are not alone in this case. Ruiz exchanged glances with his team. This wasn't just their investigation anymore. This was bigger, an international threat. Another call came through, this time from an intelligence partner in Europe. Their message was just as unsettling. They, too, had identified traces of interference linked to the same liaison officer. Someone had been operating across borders, using official channels to manipulate intelligence, disrupt investigations, and redirect targets. L-85 wasn't the mastermind. He was a piece. A valuable piece in the hands of someone who operated quietly, strategically, and with an understanding of how to stay invisible. Ruiz spoke softly. What does he gain from protecting a figure like L-85? The answer came from an analyst studying the recovered files. It's not protection, Commander. It's leverage. Whoever controls the movement of key cartel figures controls intel flow, negotiations, and operational outcomes. He wasn't helping L-85. He was using him to broker influence. The realization landed like a blow. L-85 wasn't just a fugitive. He was a bargaining chip. And the liaison officer had been holding on to him for years, moving him like a shadow piece on a board no one else could see. By evening, an international arrest operation was underway. Mexican authorities, U.S. agents, and European intelligence units coordinated a quiet, precise sweep to apprehend the liaison officer. No publicity. No noise. They didn't know who else he might have been working with. As the operation unfolded across 3 countries at once, Commander Ruiz waited by the secure line, listening to intermittent updates. Target location confirmed. Secondary access blocked. Team approaching. Stand by. Then, finally, suspect detained. No resistance. A breath left the room collectively. Not triumph. Not celebration. Just relief, the kind that comes when a danger too subtle to see has finally been exposed. With the liaison officer in custody, authorities quickly traced the extraction route. L-85 had been moved into temporary holding under international protection, but now, with the interference shut down, the process resumed correctly. Within a week, he was formally transferred into extradition proceedings. For the first time in years, the system worked the way it was supposed to. But even then, as the paperwork was filed and the press made careful, policy-compliant statements, Ruiz couldn't shake a single question. How many more pieces on that board had moved quietly for years without anyone noticing? He never got a clear answer. But 3 months later, while reviewing a new intelligence brief, he found something that made his blood turn cold, a short report describing unusual movements by another high-level figure, one whose behavior mirrored the liaison officer's patterns almost exactly. And the last line of the report read, "Subject may have been trained by the same source." Ruiz closed the file slowly. The curtain hadn't fallen. It had only been pulled back a little. And whoever stood behind it wasn't done. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because the truth hiding in the shadows is only getting darker.